So Terry Rowe and John Smith are in a conversation about um, where we are in Shambhala as we um, find our way forward and as we learn from the present, like what's working. And one topic that just came up that's worth exploring is how we've learned to use Zoom in the process team and in other settings. And so I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about that, about your observations for the process team. What have you learned and how did you learn it?
Yeah, sure. So some of the benefit that Zoom gives us that is unique to having a virtual conversation where we actually see people is that we're meeting with people from all over the globe, really, and people that we may have otherwise or may not have otherwise met at some international program once every 10 years, or who knows, right? How often, if they're not part of your sort of cohort as people are going through the journey. And so one of the big benefits has been to really connect with people on a global level, and not just connect in a sharing information, but to actually get to know people, to become very familiar with each other. Because when we see each other sort of over repeated times on Zoom calls, we see people's mannerisms, we hear the tone and inflection of their voice, we start to understand um, what are the nuances in the way that they speak and arrive that help you really feel like you're getting to know a person. And then very often people are in their home. So just like both John and I are here, you get some idea of like, how is this person's life set up and structured? And you just have a general sense of knowing people, which when you have those connections, my experience has been we develop a pretty deep trust. And that is where you actually can start to make some progress, because it's easier to have divergent views or to have difficult conversations, or even to know that I can agree with this person if you feel that you know them more. And that's one of the things about Zoom that I have found, and it has come up a lot in PT meetings, of reflecting on what was the first year like. We're going into year two. What have we learned? And I would say that the sort of Zoom modality has really allowed us on a global scale to feel connected and really have a sense of our global community and learn to know people and trust people in a different kind of way.
So I think there's the whole question about having a purpose as well. Like initially, the purpose isn't just to um, get to know each other and get a feeling for each other's mannerisms or what their house looks like. The purpose is somehow to struggle with the issues that we face and find a way forward. And so there's a kind of interesting mix to me in terms of how, and my perception of the PT or process team is that there are a lot of different purposes and different groups working on different topics. And having that, focus gives a context for that personal engagement that you're talking about.
It definitely does. And I think people were able to self-select onto what kinds of working groups, which working groups they wanted to be on. And so you find that that collective group has a common purpose. And starting from there, and within that common purpose, may be on completely different ends of the spectrum or all over. I mean, it's a scatter dot graph, right, of where people actually are on any particular conversation. But knowing that the intent of the gathering is to discuss or mull over or think about what is happening with that particular topic. And I think that that does actually help, because it gives you a starting ground of conversation where you can start to actually listen to each other and learn about the other person's perspective. And everybody sort of has a similar channeled focus about what the conversation's about. Although I do think that, I would not have said a year ago that I necessarily thought Zoom would be a, sort of a good medium for, say, deleg meetings. At this point, I actually would say I think it is, because as you meet over and over again, you really do actually get to know each other in a very rich way, that's not just words, but actually, our whole beings kind of come through these calls over time. So I think that, you might say a deleg, maybe it has a common purpose, or maybe it's just a group of people getting together to talk about, whatever, but community. But I actually think that there's a lot of value there, and that may be something that will be really positive for our community as we go forward, especially with COVID-19, keeping people at home.
Yeah, I think that in the time when we are, you know, kind of in almost, this is the front end of the lockdown part of our quarantine. And so I think that the challenge that we're facing now is to ask, well, given that we've kind of proved with the process team that these Zoom conversations can go deep, can get thorough, can get productive, then how do we start working on other kinds of things that we need to do as a global community? Like one thing, or an example of a very different kind of thing that I discovered last week was organizing interviews with people for a position that's open in the IT team. So I invited people to my main Zoom room, and then the interview took place in a breakout room. So that meant that the breakout room conversation could be private and could be constrained. And when it's over, then, the interviewee would leave. So it worked. It was kind of similar to how we've done interviews here in Portland when we're hiring like an office manager. So, I think that there are a lot of different kinds of work that we can do, that we need to do. And, I think in the end, maybe it's not about work, it's about, how do we organize feasts? Okay, this morning there was a question about, next Sunday's or Saturday's Werma feast. Can we do that on Zoom? Well, I think that there needs to be experiments, and then there needs to be sharing, like, this is how to do it. This is the things that you need. This is the list of feast artifacts that people need to get together. Because in the past, I ride people's coattails, right? I show up and maybe bring green beans, but I don't organize the whole thing, but when we're doing it at home and on Zoom, then we kind of need to learn new things about doing Zoom and doing feasts.
Eric Spiegel is doing online Zoom Werma feasts. Yes. And, that would, he's done enough now that I bet he does have a really good sense and could share some of those basic things, which, that's the other great thing I think about this platform, is it's so easy and accessible to use, that as each of us are doing different things with it, we can learn from each other and have a good learning community. And the learning community is on Zoom also, right? So we can, which is really a huge benefit to Zoom itself.
Yeah, and so I think maybe on that note, we could wrap up this recording and say, I'm going to try and interview Acharya Spiegel and say, so how does it work? What do you do? What do your participants do?
That would be great.
And try to share that. This is a slightly different model in the sense that it's like what we've been talking about is where everybody is on Zoom interacting. But another aspect is Zoom and recording it and sharing that. So, I think there are a lot of different dimensions that we need to explore at this time.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we'll want to consider on that, and so, probably for another conversation, but one of the things about recording is it's really critical that people use mindful speech, which truthfully is a great practice for all of us all the time anyway.
Yes.
But it is actually important, and also for us to remember as a community that our basis should be, first assume positive intent and be kind. If people say something that's like, ooh, we need to be sure that we can be kind to each other if we're recording and distributing that, because we want people to be able to feel that they can be real and present and honest in these Zoom calls. And once it's being recorded, if we don't have an agreement amongst our community that will assume positive intent and be kind if something is said that's disturbing, then people will stop being honest, and it does start to affect the value of the whole process.
Yeah. And I think, this is an example of how one topic leads to another. But my sense is that kindness is something that we learn from observation and actually seeing how other people do it and react to difficult, challenging statements is a bonus for us, and to see that on a global scale, to watch ourselves interacting with each other. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.